Selena had just moved to Seattle for her bachelor's degree at the university. It was her first time living away from home, and the hostel was supposed to be a new beginning. The hostel itself was an old, creaky building with a history that the locals seemed to hush up whenever she asked about it. But the price was right, and it was close to campus. On this particular night, the rain hammered against the windows with relentless ferocity, drowning out most other sounds. Selena had decided to stay in, curling up on her bed with a classic horror movie. The bluish glow of the TV screen was the only source of light, casting eerie shadows across the room. She was halfway through the film when she heard a knock at her door. She paused the movie, heart already pounding from the suspenseful scenes, and listened. The knock came again, more insistent this time. She glanced at her phone. It was nearly midnight. Who could it be at this hour? Hesitant, she got up and tiptoed to the door. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. No answer. She hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the old light fixtures flickering slightly. There was no one there. A cold draft swept past her, sending shivers down her spine. She stepped out into the hallway, looking left and right. Nothing. Shaking her head, she closed the door and locked it, trying to brush off the unease. As she turned back towards her bed, she heard it again, a knock, this time from the window. Her heart leapt into her throat. Slowly, she approached the window, her footsteps almost silent on the wooden floor. She drew back the curtain and gasped. A pale, ghostly face stared back at her, eyes wide and unblinking. Selena stumbled back, nearly tripping over her own feet. When she dared to look again, the face was gone. She closed the curtain quickly, breathing heavily, and backed away from the window. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have ignored me." Her fingers trembled as she tried to call her friend Mia, but the call wouldn't go through, no signal. Panic set in as she felt increasingly isolated. She checked the door again, making sure it was locked, and then went to her closet to grab something she could use as a weapon. The only thing she found was a heavy metal flashlight. Clutching it tightly, she tried to steady her breathing. The knocking resumed, this time from the door again, but it was different, more forceful, almost angry. "Selena, let me in," a voice hissed from the other side. It was a voice she didn't recognize, low and menacing. She backed away from the door, heart racing. The doorknob rattled as whoever it was tried to force their way in. Desperate, Selena ran to the bathroom and locked herself inside. She crouched down in the bathtub, flashlight clutched to her chest, and tried to stay silent. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Who could it be? Why were they after her? The banging on the door grew louder, more frantic. She could hear the wood starting to splinter. Tears streamed down her face as she realized how helpless she was. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The silence was deafening. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. She remained in the bathtub, too terrified to move. Finally, she heard footsteps retreating down the hallway. She waited, counting to 100 in her head, before daring to emerge. The door was still intact, though badly damaged. She listened at the door, hearing nothing but the rain outside. Gathering her courage, she slowly opened the door and peered out. The hallway was empty, but she noticed something odd, a trail of wet footprints leading down the corridor. She followed them cautiously, her flashlight beam flickering on the wet floor. The prints led to another room at the end of the hall, room 213, which she knew had been vacant for months. The door to room 213 was ajar, creaking slightly as it moved. She nudged it open with a flashlight, illuminating the dark room inside. It was empty, but the window was open, rain blowing in and soaking the floor. She approached the window and looked out, seeing nothing but the stormy night. Just as she turned to leave, she noticed something on the floor, a small, folded piece of paper. She picked it up, hand shaking, and unfolded it. Written in smeared ink were the words, "You can't hide forever." A sob escaped her lips as she crumpled the note. She had to get out of there, find help. She hurried back to her room, grabbed her phone and keys, and headed for the stairs. As she descended, she heard footsteps above her. Someone was following her. She quickened her pace, almost slipping on the wet steps. Reaching the lobby, she burst through the door and into the night, the rain immediately drenching her. She ran across the courtyard to the security office, pounding on the door. The guard, an older man named Frank, opened it, looking concerned. "Selena, what's wrong?" he asked, eyes wide. "Someone's after me," she gasped. "They were in the hostel, trying to get into my room." Frank nodded, grabbing his flashlight and a walkie-talkie. "Stay here," he instructed. "I'll go check it out." Selena watched as he hurried back into the building, leaving her alone in the small office. She tried calling me again, but still no signal. Minutes passed, and she grew increasingly anxious. Finally, the walkie-talkie on the desk crackled to life. "Selena," Frank's voice came through, but it sounded distorted. "I found something. You need to see this." Fear gripping her, Selena picked up the walkie-talkie. "What is it?" There was a long pause, then, "Come to the basement." Her heart sank. The basement was the creepiest part of the hostel, a labyrinth of old storage rooms and boiler rooms. But she had no choice. She needed answers. She grabbed the walkie-talkie and flashlight and made her way to the basement door. The stairs creaked ominously as she descended, the air growing colder and more damp. Her flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. She reached the bottom and called out, "Frank?" No response. She moved through the narrow corridors, the silence pressing in on her. Then, up ahead, she saw a figure slumped against the wall. It was Frank. She rushed to his side, shaking him. He was unconscious, a large bruise on his head. Next to him was another note, stained with blood. "Too late." Selena's blood ran cold. She looked around, realizing she was not alone. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she sensed movement behind her. She turned slowly, flashlight beams sweeping the dark hallway. A shadow darted out of sight, and she heard a faint, mocking laugh. She backed away, trying to drag Frank with her, but he was too heavy. Panic set in as she realized how trapped she was. Then she remembered the boiler room. It had a second exit. She abandoned the walkie-talkie and flashlight, opting for stealth, and crept through the darkened basement. The door to the boiler room creaked open, and she slipped inside. The oppressive heat and noise from the boilers were almost comforting compared to the silence outside. She made her way to the far end, where the emergency exit was. As she reached for the handle, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, eyes wide with fear. Standing in the doorway was a tall figure, face obscured by a hood. "You can't escape," the figure said, voice cold and devoid of emotion. Selena backed away, heart pounding. "Why are you doing this?" she cried. The figure stepped closer, and in the dim light, she saw a glint of metal, a knife. "Because it's fun," the figure replied, lifting the knife menacingly. Desperate, Selena grabbed a nearby wrench and swung it with all her strength. The figure stumbled, but recovered quickly, slashing at her. She felt a sharp pain in her arm and screamed, dropping the wrench. Blood flowed from the wound, but adrenaline kept her moving. She turned and bolted for the exit, throwing the door open and fleeing into the stormy night. She didn't stop running until she reached the main road, drenched and bleeding. She flagged down a passing car, and the driver, seeing her distress, called the police. The authorities arrived quickly, but by the time they searched the hostel, the attacker was gone. They found Frank, injured but alive, and took Selena to the hospital. As she sat in the emergency room, waiting to be stitched up, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The words on the notes echoed in her mind, "You can't hide forever." Days passed, and the police investigation turned up little evidence. Selena was moved to a new hostel with better security, but the trauma lingered. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on her studies. Every shadow, every creak of the building set her on edge. Then, one night, as she lay in her new room, trying to calm her racing thoughts, her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "I'm watching you." She froze, blood running cold. Her nightmare was far from over. Selena's heart pounded as she stared at the message on her phone. She felt trapped in a never-ending nightmare. She showed the message to the police, but with no solid leads or evidence, there was little they could do. The attacker remained a ghost, slipping through the cracks of their investigation. She tried to go about her daily life, but the constant fear gnawed at her. Her new hostel was supposed to be safer, but now every sound, every shadow seemed like a potential threat. Her friends and family worried about her, urging her to come home, but she was determined not to let fear dictate her life. One evening, Selena decided to take a walk to clear her mind. The hostel grounds were quiet, the usual chatter of students replaced by the soothing rustle of leaves in the breeze. She walked to a small park nearby, trying to lose herself in the serenity. As she sat on a bench, watching the sun set, she felt a sense of calm for the first time in weeks. But that calm was shattered when she noticed someone standing in the shadows, watching her. Panic gripped her, but she forced herself to stay composed. She stood up and started walking back towards the hostel, quickening her pace as she heard footsteps behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the same hooded figure from the basement, moving swiftly towards her. Selena broke into a run, her heart pounding in her ears. She sprinted through the park, weaving between trees and benches, trying to lose her pursuer. She could hear the figure gaining on her, the sound of his footsteps growing louder. She stumbled onto the main road, nearly colliding with a car. The driver honked and swerved, shouting obscenities, but she didn't stop. She burst into the hostel lobby, gasping for breath, and slammed the door shut behind her. The security guard on duty, a young man named Jason, looked up in surprise. "Selena, what's wrong?" he asked, rushing over to her. "He's here," she managed to say between breaths. "The person who's been stalking me, he's outside." Jason immediately called the police and escorted Selena to the security room, where they watched the CCTV footage. The cameras had caught the hooded figure following her through the park, but the person had disappeared just before she entered the hostel. Selena's heart sank. The figure was out there, waiting. The police arrived quickly and searched the area, but again found nothing. They promised to increase patrols around the hostel and urged Selena to stay inside as much as possible. But she knew that as long as her stalker was out there, she would never feel safe. That night, Selena couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind against the windows set her on edge. She decided to keep a journal, writing down everything that had happened, hoping it might help the police piece together some clues. Weeks turned into months, and the stalker seemed to vanish. There were no more messages, no sightings. Selena began to relax, thinking maybe it was finally over. She even started to focus on her studies again, regaining a semblance of normalcy. One rainy night, almost a year after the ordeal began, Selena was in her room, finishing an assignment. The hostel was quiet, most students away for the weekend. She stretched and got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As she walked down the dark hallway, she noticed a door slightly ajar. Curiosity and dread filled her as she approached the door. She pushed it open and peered inside. The room was empty, but on the floor was a familiar sight, a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The message was clear: "Welcome back." A chill ran down her spine. She backed out of the room, only to bump into someone behind her. She spun around, and there stood the hooded figure, blocking her path. She screamed and tried to run, but the figure grabbed her, dragging her back into the room. She struggled, kicking and screaming, but the figure was too strong. He threw her to the floor, and she scrambled to her feet, backing into a corner. The figure approached slowly, the knife glinting in his hand. "Why are you doing this?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. The figure lowered the hood, revealing a face she recognized. It was a fellow student, someone she had seen around the campus but never really known. "Because you were supposed to be mine," he said, voice cold and detached. "But you ignored me, so I had to make you notice." Selena's mind raced, trying to make sense of the madness. She glanced around the room, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. The figure lunged at her, and she grabbed a heavy lamp from the bedside table, swinging it with all her might. It connected with the figure's head, and he stumbled back, dazed. She seized the opportunity and ran for the door, but he recovered quickly, grabbing her ankle and pulling her to the ground. She kicked and screamed, desperate to escape. Just as the figure raised the knife, the door burst open, and Jason, the security guard, tackled the attacker to the floor. The police arrived moments later, arresting the stalker and taking him away. Selena was shaken but grateful to be alive. She thanked Jason, who had heard her screams and come to her rescue just in time. In the days that followed, Selena learned more about her stalker. He had become obsessed with her after seeing her around campus and had meticulously planned the terror campaign to make her notice him. The police found a twisted shrine in his dorm room, filled with photos and mementos of Selena. She slowly began to rebuild her life, but the scars of the ordeal remained. She was more cautious, more aware of her surroundings, but she refused to let fear control her. Months later, as she walked across the campus, she felt a sense of empowerment. She had faced her worst nightmare and survived. She was determined to live her life to the fullest, no longer a victim but a survivor. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled outside and the shadows seemed to move on their own, she couldn't help but wonder if she was truly safe. And in those moments, she would remember the words of the final note: "You can't hide forever." If you enjoyed Selena's harrowing journey through fear and survival, be sure to subscribe to Vulnerable Screams for more spine-chilling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Until next time, remember that sometimes what lurks in the darkness is more than just a figment of your imagination. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and good night.